So come join us. Y'all can bring a glass of wine or your water, whatever, into the room. We're good. However, if there's any spills, you just don't record that.
You guys are very shadowed by that.
But, oh, yeah. All right. Should we be in the corner? Yeah. You were doing this. So, I just want to welcome everyone. I am Charlotte Gordon. For those of you who don't know me, I'm the artistic director here. This is Heidi Bender Kauffman, our educator, and Klaire Smith, who's a member of the Ohio Advisory Group of the National Museum of Women in the Arts.
It's a mouthful.
Right. I know, at this hour of the day, I've got to read that. And we've got others to introduce, but first, I do my commercials. We have to thank the Ohio Arts Council, and I always do this, even if there's not a representative here. The Ohio Arts Council touches everyone's lives in the state, whether we realize it or not, in our everyday impact of all of the arts we come in contact with. The Ohio Arts Council has funded it. We also want to thank the Scioto Foundation for also supporting us. Without those two entities, we would not probably be open and certainly not be admission free. So Klaire, I'm going to let you introduce the other two members of the advisory group.
We have Talcon Quinn and Leah McCary.
All right, both from Athens, who are also, so the background on this exhibition is that during COVID, we actually met in person. And Klaire said, maybe it was 2019, that you said, we're forming this exhibition. It was still this idea. I think a lot of people don't know how exhibitions come to be. So they always start as somebody's really great brainchild. And so Klaire came to me and said, we're doing this. Would you host it here? Would you be a venue? And I jumped on, not knowing who the artists were, who the curators were, anything about it, but just knowing that Klaire felt real strongly about it and that it was a really good, strong project. So we jumped on the bandwagon. But why don't you talk a little bit about the process of this advisory group and the role and the other exhibitions that went on around this?
Sure. Yeah, so the Ohio Advisory Group for the National Museum of Women in the Arts was formed sometime around in the late 2010s by some women a handful of women in Cleveland that got together to create a committee for the National Museum of Women in the Arts in Washington, D.C. And so there are about 23, I believe there are 23 committees across the country and also in a handful of other countries that participate in fundraising efforts for the National Museum of Women in the Arts, and also that we are the folks that help bring curators to the National Museum of Women in the Arts Women to Watch national exhibition. So Women to Watch happens on a national level in Washington, D.C., as well as on the state level in the states that have groups. The committee, the group that I'm on, brought curators, chose 2 curators, and those curators then sought out artists that represented different demographics across the state and different viewpoints, and particularly interested in what these artists were saying during the pandemic time. And so our curators presented these artists to the National Museum of Women in the Arts for that exhibition that took place earlier this year in April to August. It's no longer up, but you can catch it on their website. There's still plenty of pictures and information about this woman. Miggy Waugh here was our representative for Ohio. Her work is fantastic. Some of her work was taken to Washington, D.C. and was on display there. So yeah, that's sort of a brief overview of how this works.
All right. Yep, go for it.
All right. Also, we just want to thank everybody for coming today. And I also want to say that after our session today, we will have a session in Spanish. Entonces, si ustedes tienen preguntas en español, después de esta sesión podemos hablar en español. So, I also want to invite people to ask questions.
Please.
One thing that is so exciting for me at an exhibition like this is that a lot of people in our area maybe have not had exposure to this kind of artwork before. And so this has been a really good and fun challenge for us, how to unpack this kind of conceptual artwork with a public who would probably really enjoy it if they had some insight. And what we found was that they did. So please, if you have any questions, if you're thinking it, somebody else probably also is thinking it. And it will stimulate a larger conversation that's very productive. Thank you.
All right. So, so right before we're going to dive into all this. So, whenever you look at artwork, you need to look at it through the lens of kind of art history. When was it made? What was going on? What was going on at that point in time? Were there wars going on? Was there, was there a famine? Was there, what was going on art historically? And we go back through Baroque work and Renaissance work and who was ruling then. And so the lens that we're going to look at this work through is the pandemic. This work was all created as a response to the isolation, to the fear, the vulnerability that we all felt during that point in time. And so as we look at this, keep that in the back of your mind. The title of the exhibition is A New World. And so the artists are responding to the notion of what is a new world. The new world is constructed by what the bricks that are being laid in the present. So what are we addressing in the present that then brings us into the future? But then also like in the middle of this pandemic. And so how the artists responded to the pandemic. So where should we start? We also did not rehearse at all. So this is loose. And like Heidi said, jump in if you have a question. Should we start with maybe one?
Yeah.
All right. Who wants to start?
Do you want to take it away, Charlotte?
All right, I'll start. So our little microphones are for our own recording. This won't broadcast us, but we want to get a clear recording. So Megiwa was born and raised in Tokyo, in the middle of the city. Her high school was just 5 blocks from that big tower that you see in all the photographs of Tokyo. And in 2008, she left Tokyo for the United States, and Ohio was not her destination. But she got to Yellow Springs and saw cornfields and realized what a whole different environment this is, and she stayed. So the lens that we can look through here is of an immigrant, of someone who shifted their entire life, their entire environment. And so she responded to the pandemic by going outside. Yellow Springs is known for its walking paths through the woods. It's beautiful if you haven't been there. To hike there is just really breathtaking. And so some of these, I'm going to start down here with this one. So she realized that, as she was reflecting on nature and the animals in nature, and so as she was having to alter her lifestyle, she's looking at the animals. Are they altering their lifestyle? This whole thing is going on. But she realized that when they are fearful or when they see danger, that they burrow. They hide and they burrow. So she got back to her studio and said, what kind of uniform could we wear? Like if we were to need to hide and burrow. So she constructed this piece so that there's sleeves and there's little cubbies to hide in. She was very sympathetic to a lot of the immigrant workers who were afraid to go seek help in a hospital or from a doctor if they were sick, because, what would happen to them? Would they be called out? And so it was like everyone was hiding and burrowing. So she created this label, burrows and covers. And so, so this is like each of these pieces she wanted to have, appear to be like a working field study. Like this was a working thing that you would carry out in nature, and there was something that you would do in nature. She is an artist who does an immense amount of research, and she just, that research may not be evident at first glance, but the more you dive into her pieces, you realize that she's really, there's a lot of thought in there and a lot of research that went into it. So she wanted these to appear like bundles. They have these little ties down here as if you would bundle them up and then bring them back in and hang them up and look at what we have. We don't have, I could talk about art until the cows come home, so I gotta keep this moving. So I'll talk about, this one is the alien species, which she became, in being outside, she realized that how many native species, she was reading a lot about the invasive species that came in. And she realized that a lot of the language that is used in plant life is also used to humans when humans relocate. And so she was drawing these parallels between the plant species and human species who are all relocating, and how are they different, but just that the tag words and the language that is used that is oftentimes not positive, that, we have to destroy it, we have to eradicate it, we have to, it's a do or die thing, and not that a new species might bring in something good to us. All right, so are there questions?
I have
Yeah, insight.
details that I'd like to share with you quickly about this piece. So one thing that we're going to notice, these blue letters, if you go up closely, you can notice that there are different kinds of intensity. Some spots are lighter and some are darker. And that's because this is cyanotype printed. So it's really fitting that this work about the environment during COVID was printed with the sun. So one thing that has fascinated a lot of groups are these shoes covered in moss. And a comment that many of our visitors have made is, well, doesn't moss take a long time to grow? And it does. But for all of us, right, we remember that phrase, a rolling stone gathers no moss. And sometimes you just have to hunker down and be still to really understand a place or a country or a town. So when I look at this piece, I think about that importance, the importance of being rooted in that space. And we have reference to north, moss growing on the north side of a tree. All right, thanks.
I just want to point out, I think while you're here, if you've not spent much time with these pieces, they're very intimate. Spend a little bit of time with them. They made me emotional, at least when I looked at them, when I was spending time with them. So that's all I really have to add. Charlotte's pretty wonderful at talking about the art. So
So I'm going to suggest that we move over and talk about that Kathleen Miniature Monument.
yeah.
So this is a highlight of the exhibition for many people. In particular, people who might be a little scared of art museums. So the way this piece is supposed to work, you are supposed to sit in the waterfall chair. And actually, could I have a volunteer sit in the waterfall chair? Go for it, Justin. I just met Justin, and he is a great, thank you for volunteering. Okay. Now, the artist, through Tran, she's creating a fantasy world that kind of mimics parts of maybe the natural world. we can look at this chair and we can say, oh, it's rocks, you know, and it's got flowers growing all over it. But it's not. It is absolutely plastic, absolutely synthetic. And so when I see something like that, the word simulacra, that comes to mind, right? It's trying to be, pretending to be this real world experience, but it actually, it's its own thing that isn't that at all. Now, what we do see is that the artist is trying to create this kind of fantasy world. And Justin, I would love to know from you right now, how do you feel about the artist as they think about your own experience? Do you feel like, what kind of experience are they trying to set up for you?
Subjective on how each individual person is going to interpret this piece, especially like specifically like what is going on in that individual person's life. But at least since COVID, I'm sorry, like it's, you know, no one has had the same experience, but everyone has had these profound experiences all at once, and this is sort of bringing that to mind. It's sort of what's been happening the last decade, and I'm just like gonna sit back, just retreat into the wood. I just want to retreat into the woods, abscond from civilization, and sit in a nice, cushy rock recliner.
Sure. So it's a rock recliner. It's really what?
How so much content is created like this. It's a distraction. It's a lovely little sort of like distraction from reality.
Exactly. It's a distraction. And Justin hits this right on the head. So she creates this space that makes you feel cared for almost. This place where, you know, you can have this, you can let your imagination run wild, you can sit back. It's actually a massage chair, although we don't have it set up to be a massage chair right now. And you're supposed to get to this place where you're relaxed and complacent. And she's created this video, which here is called Happy National Cat Day. But another name I saw for this on some of the exhibition materials was called Loop Soup. And that plays a lot into how I interpret this piece.
Right.
And I'm thinking about what you just said, Justin, about, you know, wanting to sit back and relax while all this stuff is happening in the world. And so she picks a theme that is very popular statistically, cat videos. How many of you have been guilty of dialing up some cat videos? I'm going to admit, it's me.
I'm gonna admit too.
Sometimes the world is very harsh, but a cat video, it's something you can scroll, you can just look at and it plays, and you don't have to think, there's no politics, you can just think about the good feeling you're experiencing at the time. And so as we look at this, it seems like we're looking at this very entertaining cat video, and it seems to be based on reality in a way like the chair is based on reality. But as we look, we will see some unusual things happen. Here we go. Something weird is going to happen here. So she's pouring out the ketchup, which is yarn, and then there's dismembered cat parts in the soup. And it seems funny when you look at it, but if it was real, it wouldn't be funny at all. And so we want to think about that, how the way the images are presented to us make us feel differently about the situation that might really exist.
But you know, I think it's funny. It's not funny. So this is a piece that just reflects a lot of humor. But when we approach artworks in a media that we're not used to approaching artworks in, it's hard to immediately say, oh yeah, that's a funny piece, because you're so busy saying, wait a minute, what am I looking at? What is going on here? So, yes, it's a piece that is infused with humor on a lot of levels. So.
I feel like the humor could be like dark kind of humor too. Like you gotta feel like, oh, this is funny because it's awful.
Right. Yeah. There's that campy aspect to it. Yeah. Right. There's a very, a little campiness, a little, So.
I mean, what I said earlier, I was like, this is Facebook. This is where we all sat during COVID. I was like, that's how I see.
Right.
Right. like what we all did instead of like living outside.
Here we have the artwork of Klaire Gut, and this work is called Plain Chant for Paper Hands. Klaire is somebody who works a lot with digital technologies and video games in particular. Who here spends some time playing video games or in an online world of some capacity? All right, thank you. It's very common, and so she's kind of making a commentary on being immersed in a very digital world while at the same time living in a very physical world. One of the features that we have here is an arch, and she's created the arch out of something very familiar. So I don't know about all of you, but at some point in my life, when I was maybe very poor, maybe like when I was in college, I used milk crates for a variety of things. How many of you have used milk crates as furniture in your life?
Right. Yeah.
Yes. And I still have some milk crates that I use as furniture in my house.
They are.
They are. They are. We're in this world where it's very helpful to have something temporary and cheap because we're moving all of the time and we can build things very quickly out of our temporary cheap materials. In her case, she's replicating what we call a catenary arch. And this is found a lot of times in certain kinds of buildings that are historically very fancy. And in particular, we're thinking about a cathedral. How many of you have been in a church where they've had this kind of arch in the past? Okay. And I'm especially thinking about very, very big cathedrals that were built, for example, in the Middle Ages in Europe, and how having a building with an arch enabled the building to be built very towards the sky, towards the heavens, and to kind of promote this relationship like you're entering the space that's very holy and close to God, and you're supposed to be able to feel the sense of amazement when you walk into it. But we don't live in that era anymore. We don't live in an era where you build a building to last for 500 years, to experience the glory of God. We live in the milk crate world, where we're building things with cheap materials very quickly, but we still maybe have a longing to experience God, even though we're in this temporary world, kind of mediated by a lot of digital things. So, it's kind of interesting there, her reflection. We also have the fans. I don't know about all of you, but at some point in my life, I've probably seen maybe a dozen times pictures of angels reflected. Angels with their hair blowing in the wind. And it's always some sort of very natural seeming thing, right? The divine power, makes the hair of these holy beings just ripple. But in our case, we're creating our own wind with these amazing technologies that we've created in our temporary world. So kind of an interesting piece to spend time with in thinking about the way that maybe you interact with space and how maybe it influences the way that you interact with higher powers or with the world.
Yeah. I think we're good. No, any questions? Any feedback? Did anybody get a whole different perspective of this when they walked in and looked at it? Right. Well, yeah. But so, people have walked in. We've now lived with this for a month, and people are like, what is that? But then once you get the explanation of where the artist is, it makes a different kind of sense. Yeah. So Calista Lyons is a Columbus artist, and she's really interested in the shifting world, and the power of water, and how water can be both soothing and really violent, kind of sometimes at the same time. And so she's got images of water amniotic fluid breaking, which is also a sign of birth, new life. And then there's dams bursting, and then there's just rampant water, coming ashore. So, so she's really looking at that renewal, what happens, but also the grief, that it's an ecological grief, how we respond when we hear about the global warming, when we hear about ecological disasters, when we hear about all of these things, and we're really wondering, how long is this planet really going to sustain us? And so this whole piece is really a response to the environmental stresses and an emotional response to those environmental stresses. And then, as we look at the birth, the amniotic fluid breaking, a new life coming on, and how many more generations will get to be here in this. So she could have gone out and bought brand new monitors to display this work on, but instead she resurrected these really great old TVs that we remember from our youth and how heavy they are. And so she brought these up and wired them all together. So, and I will say, these will be available for free after the exhibit. If anybody feels like they need a cathode ray TV, cathode ray tube TV in their homes. A lot of them have these VHS players. Yeah, so if you want to take one home, come talk to us on the 7th. Yeah, so, all right, questions? They're all teetering on these little, it's a fragile piece. In a lot of ways, this is a fragile piece because these stands are top heavy. They're, they've made us really nervous. So, yeah.
That was going to be my question, is stands play into?
The stands do play into this, and the stands are all made from recycled materials or castaway materials. And so, and she did harvest, my understanding is that she harvested the films. So it's kind of like she did this collection, that she created a piece of a collection of existing materials and brought them together, which also was reflective of the COVID times. We weren't all going out shopping at Dick Blick's. We were at home getting our Amazon boxes, but we really had to work a lot with what we had. And so I think, too, that the use of materials also reflects the time period in which this was made.
I'd just like to note how unsettling the feeling of the TV. I don't know if everyone feels like this, but when I'm inside of the televisions, the sound and the feeling, like the electricity that the televisions emit, feel unsettling. And I think it resonates perfectly with what the televisions are showing. So another layer to the work.
Right. That it's not necessarily a feel-good piece. It is ecological, and I had not heard that term used before, ecological grief, that we really need to stop and look.
So I had the experience of setting up this piece, and it took a while to get all the cables put back, so I was able to listen to it for an extended period of time. And I have to say that the longer that you listen to it, the more impact you'll receive from it. So if you're somebody who has time in Portsmouth in the next week or so, feel free to come back and listen and watch. And I guarantee you'll pick up more, and the experience will be personal. I heard somebody walk by and say, "I love those," and I agree. I really would love to take one home with me in an ideal world. This work is by a photographer, and it's really interesting. You think about a photographer, they go to school so they can take these really beautiful images that are thought-provoking. She's devoted herself to being an artist using the medium of photography. However, we're in this world where we are just bombarded with images. We look online, you know, we see all these images, ads pop up, we're watching TV, we see images, and we've kind of stopped paying attention to them. I think it's about 12 seconds, the amount of time we might devote to an image. So this photographer thought about ways to slow down her viewer. So if you want to come up, you can come and look inside. And what she's done is she's created this obstacle so that you can see the image behind. So you have to kind of look through the hole and then try to figure out what the image is behind. And it's reflected back with the mirror. You can see yourself in it. If you would like to see, we recreated one of these using some of our own images from the Ackerman collection, and you can feel free to pick it up. Sometimes it helps people to be able to see how a thing might be constructed so they can interact with it. So I'm glad that so many of you continue to look. I'm glad that so many of you were able to experience that. For those of you who did get up close, do you feel that you noticed more details than you notice in an average picture? Yeah.
Well, I like too that you become part of the piece.
Yeah.
You know, that in viewing, you become part of that photograph of the what is actually.
Should we go in the cubby?
You know, can we talk about this one over here, our craft? So, this artist has worked in many media through her life as an artist, and right now has settled on this hook rug technique. And it's craft based. It's something that was traditionally women's work, you know, rug making and yarn making, you know. Working in this craft media was a woman's job, and so she's making a whole statement in that here. So she does a lot of self-portraiture too, and this is a self-portrait of the artist. But she surrounded herself with these Greco-Roman heads, and it is at least as I read it, and I did go read her statements and listen to what she had to say about it. But, you know, you think about these old heads, these are representing centuries ago, these women in art history on statues, but yet they've been superimposed with these horrific looks on their face. Like, oh my God, are we still there? Have we not in 2024 become, you know, gotten any further beyond that? So, but I like the fact that, first of all, that craft has been elevated to an art form. And so this does get included in an art exhibition as a hook rug, but that she's just got these whole layers of other things going on, and a real nod to what is women's work and what that history of women's work has been through the years.
So this is Xia Zhang with Fearful and Avoidant. And I like how she takes the neon fearful and then flips it upside down to show that these are maybe sides of a coin or extremes that people go to that are opposites. She's a person who investigates trauma or those really difficult experiences that kind of shape us for life and ways that people handle it. So on this side, we have someone. Let's look together at some of the details that we notice. So what do you notice happening? If this is a story, what's happening in that image?
Come on, those up front, talk about it.
Just something you see.
Just objects.
Yes. What would you do with a cupcake? If you had multiple cupcakes, I think about cupcakes being used in a party or being used to share with people, right? Okay, so maybe she wants to connect with people. And then I also see that she's looking out, right? But people can't see in, and she's probably not going to have a good connection with people through the slats in the blind.
Yeah, she's only got one slat out, so she sees it that this much.
Yes.
Right, there's that one missing.
I feel like Chris's story in my head that she has maybe an abusive partner, and she is fearful to go outside, so she needs to sit and look through a little slit in the blinds for fear of her eye getting glimpsed by a passerby or something.
She obviously wants connection. She's got that. Right.
Either narrative could work for this.
Or she's
And
fearful that no one's going to show up.
great insights. We also noticed that she's naked. Now in art, there's a lot of naked people in art, but in this case, I think it's because we're referencing the vulnerability that she feels, like how fragile, how exposed she feels. On the other hand, we have avoidant. So there are those people also who totally avoid the problem, right? So let's look at how that person's handling. So we have the door open with the keys in it. Guilty. And she's sleeping with the door open and the keys, in the door. So if somebody wanted to come in and do her harm, they could. But on the other hand, there could also be a great deal of freedom in that, right? And not having to be burdened by worry. What are things that all of you are thinking about as you're looking at these pieces? This piece, sorry.
I mean, I think just to echo what you just said. I mean, I feel like she could be, living carefree, but she could also be inviting something in, and she's avoiding the entirety of the situation because she's sleeping anyway. It doesn't really matter what's happening, does it? So I feel like, this is a person who has problems and knows that they have problems, but would like to pretend that they don't have problems instead. Yeah, that's what I see there. Someone being like, "Oh, I'm just taking a nap." Yeah, but why?
Why not?
Right, right.
This is one, so it is funny because this show did come in, and as we're unpacking them and reading about all of it, there are sometimes that we're like, wait, I don't really get it. What are we looking at? So this is one that as a staff, we spent a lot of time talking about. And Christina is an immigrant as well from Estonia. And is reflecting back, she, to some degree, on the post-Soviet brutalist architecture that she had been surrounded by, and yet superimposing a human element to that. So, like this one is doom scrolling, and as a printmaker, as an artist, she's using repetitive lines. You see the same kinds of lines, the same kinds of forms repeated over and over. And this is called doom scrolling. And, we've all done that. You just sit there and you flip and, and then it's like, oh my God, what have I just done for the last half hour? So it's kind of that, how we oftentimes can lose control over these environments that we may or may not be able to control, but in the end we do. I mean, in this case, we can control it. I don't know. Take it from here. Go.
I think it's interesting to note, especially about a piece about control and the lack of control. There's so much control necessary with printmaking and that process. So with printmaking, if you're not familiar with it, you don't just draw on the paper. You draw or you create a matrix, which is a piece of wood, or in this case, some linoleum block and letterpress. And you have to create something that then becomes what would simply be a stamp. And so that process is more than just drawing. You have to carve, or you have to use, like with cyanotypes, the sun, like in Mikiwa's work. And so printmaking adds another level of intention and adds another level of work to a piece of art that looks very simple. These works are simplistic in nature, but the actual action and process of them is really not.
And it's backwards, right? Like what you're drawing has to get printed. the way you're creating it is going to be, the print is going to be the opposite of how you're drawing.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. So you have to think of everything in reverse.
Backwards.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah, that's a good point. And so this artist also created these two sculptures. And if you look at the surface, that is very much like that plate, that surface, creating that repetitive surface on what may have been a plate. These are like a 3D rendition of these prints. And I think it was Heidi, were you the one who said like we've all been to that point of, you visually look at this with the bricks and you think that should just fall down. And we've all been to that point of how much more can we take before we are going to topple down? Or are we stronger than we think we are to be able to keep our whole lives in balance? Any more insights?
I just want to point out the scale. Many times when things are raised up to human scale, they can be great metaphors for our own lives. So I always think that way. That's not always the case. That's something that I'm thinking about here.
All right. So our last artist up here is a Cincinnati artist. And what I really like what these curators have done is they really looked at including everyone from a lot of disenfranchised backgrounds. And Catherine Whited is a differently abled artist. And she does work, she's an adult, she works within a group of what would be for an art studio for disabled adults. And early in her life, she started looking, she came across cataloging, like a scientific catalog, and how in these catalogs there were just one item on a page that were very carefully depicted, and then that title of that object, or think about flowers, or think about an Audubon print of a bird with that bird name on it. And so she started cataloging her world in this very systematic way. And so she makes lists. She starts by making lists of the objects in her world, the objects that she comes across in her daily life. And she starts with lists. She gets other people to give them their lists of what are on shelves, or what are on a grocery shelf, or what's in their refrigerator shelves. And so she takes other people's lists and then she illustrates them in kind of this minimalist way. They're all about the same size, and they're boiled down to the essence of what that piece is. Sometimes they're in this egg shape, this egg format, kind of overlaid the whole thing, and then she very carefully labels what they are. And I think that COVID too was a time that we were all categorizing and prioritizing what's important. What do I really need to include in my life right now? What can I do away with right now? And so I think that that this is also a reflection of that time. But I was really glad to see that the curators did include her in the exhibition, because I think they're really well done. I think that it really, sometimes we just don't separate out and really look at the objects in our lives and the beauty and the simplicity of just those things around us. So, I don't know. Are there any questions or comments? Right, don't you? Yeah. I know. Well, and if you do want to go through our permanent collection, it's open, but we have, Clarence Carter is our artist that grew up here, and we have his collection, and he also worked a lot with eggs. So when we saw these eggs, we're like, oh, these are so great with Carter eggs. So we respond well to eggs here. But I really thank you all for coming. There's so much going on around town. Everybody's setting up for River Days or for Final Friday or for the fish fry. There's so much setting up going on right now. So I really appreciate everyone coming. And feel free to walk around. I also brought down, and I could put these downstairs, the plans for our new expansion. And so September 7th will be the last day that we are open to the public. And then we take all the artwork and pack it up. This show gets returned to the artists. And we start renovating. We're going to renovate and get all new walls downstairs and up here. There are 45 years of spackle in these walls. And sometimes it's hard to get art to hang on them. So we're getting all new walls downstairs and up here. And then we're doing an addition next door. So with a whole new wing. This museum has over 25,000 objects in the permanent collection. And so there's just so many swaths of the collection that are out for a short time because we've got to flip them around. We've got historic photographs. We've got a lot of craft work. We've got more paintings and contemporary work. So we're really excited to be able to spill that out. All of this entire building will be devoted to the permanent collection. So, yeah.